you lead me to my second question, which is the European gas market has changed dramatically over the last few months, and the gas prices are rising continuously, and the LNG imports don't seem able to cover the needs. Do you think that Europe was adequately prepared to be independent from Russian gas?
Well, look, I think that Europe was overly dependent on Russian gas for a long time. It was inexpensive because transportation was so cheap. Any alternative to Russia has to come by ship or a very long distance pipeline. So one can understand economically how that dependence grew, but geopolitically, it now is clearly, in hindsight, something that left Europe quite exposed to Russian interference. I think if you look at what Europe has done since the war began in February, it's really quite impressive. It's very impressive how Europe has come together and set the policy frame to withdraw Russian oil and gas over time, not that long a period of time. I think it's impressive how they've built the capacity to unload natural gas offshore on either fixed or floating platforms. They have some issues that are just going to take some time to address. I mean, the fact that far Western Europe, like Spain, are not physically connected by pipeline, it just takes time if you want to address that. You have to have the political will and then a major construction project.
Mm-hmm. And also, the European Commission announced a proposal on the energy crisis, including a mandatory reduction in electricity demand in peak hours. Are these measures enough to protect the European citizens looking at the winter that is approaching?
Look, I think that Europe has built up impressive stockpiles of reserves, and none of us can predict precisely what the temperatures will be. So some of this depends on how cold of a winter it is. The fact that Russia has shut down gas is accelerating the need to address some of these issues. And the implementation of the price cap on products is something that we have to see how that plays out. I think it's a smart policy and a good policy. Mm-hmm. But interestingly, if you look at where Europe was a few years ago, the price cap is really a way to free up ongoing trade in a world where Europe was ready to shut down completely the insurability of that transport. And, so I think the world is coming together, the Western world's coming together, united, that there has to be a vigilant position to stand up to Russia, at the same time, trying to maintain global energy markets in a way that avoids the kind of both inflation and potentially recession that could be so painful. Mm-hmm. It's a very, very small needle to thread, but I think policy leaders are doing a pretty good job. If you had to bet on the odds, I don't know if they can pull it off, but I think they've outperformed the odds in terms of the political will to put mechanisms in place to have a good shot at it.
Mm-hmm. Secretary Liu, what's the impact of this ongoing energy crisis for the US citizens? And do you still have the concerns you had some months ago for a possible recession?
Look, the United States is in a far stronger position in terms of energy than we've been in decades, really in my whole professional lifetime. We're a net energy exporter. We do import various products and fuels, but the question for the United States is really global energy prices. And that's different from the problem that Europe is facing, which is availability of supply. So for the United States, the question is, will there be an additional inflationary component? Not will we have enough energy to run our factories and heat our homes? True. So I think the United States is in a pretty good position. The fundamental driver of inflation is the economic adjustment post-COVID, mm-hmm. the tremendous fiscal response and monetary policy response of policymakers around the world helped prevent the collapse of the global economy after COVID, but now we have to work our way out of it. And I think policymakers are trying to figure out how do you do that without unduly putting the brakes on the economy. But it's not a secret that when you raise interest rates, your purpose is to slow the economy. You're trying to slow it just enough to tame inflation without triggering unacceptably high unemployment. That's very hard. I think we're still looking at a situation where inflation is a serious challenge, and employment markets are staying very strong. I don't think that's fundamentally a question of oil prices right now. It's certainly emotionally in the United States a huge factor, but right now energy prices are coming down and inflation is staying high. So it shows that we have some underlying issues. We can't control global oil prices. We can reduce oil from the strategic reserves. We can increase exports. We can do things on the margin, but fundamentally, it's a question of kind of restoring some stability in global oil markets, which is why it's important for those who can to produce more and to navigate through the conflict with Russia.